Chapter 1. The perfect picture. Kyle Ross had never been the kind of man who chased chaos. He liked order, the kind that came from knowing where his keys were, paying bills on time, and waking up next to someone who made the world feel less sharp around the edges. For 3 years, that someone had been Rebecca Sims. At 28, Kyle considered himself lucky. He had a stable job, a modest apartment with a view of the river if you craned your neck just right, and a fiancée who laughed at his dry jokes even when they weren't funny. 5 months ago, he'd slipped a ring on her finger under a canopy of fairy lights in her parents' backyard. She cried. He cried quietly because he wasn't the type to make a scene. Since then, life had felt like a well-oiled machine. Their families got along so well they even had dinners without the kids. They didn't argue about housework. They rolled up their sleeves and did what needed to be done. Most mornings, Kyle would pinch his arm just to make sure he wasn't dreaming. He should have known better. Life was never perfect. New Year's Eve had arrived like a glittering promise. Rebecca was buzzing with excitement, her phone lighting up every few minutes with messages from friends. Kyle, meanwhile, was ironing his shirt for the 3rd time, wondering why clubs always felt like stepping into someone else's chaos. "Are you sure you're okay with this?" Rebecca asked, appearing in the doorway like a vision in silver. Her dress shimmered under the soft light, hugging curves Kyle had memorized long ago. He smiled, setting the iron aside. "Of course, it's your night. I'm just here to make sure you don't lose your purse." Rebecca laughed, crossing the room to kiss his cheek. "You're too good to me. Don't forget it," he teased, slipping into his jacket. The city was alive when they stepped outside. Frost glittered on car roofs, and the streets pulsed with headlights and laughter. Kyle parked 2 blocks from the club, because valet was a scam, and he wasn't about to pay $30 for someone to drive his car 10 feet, and walked hand in hand with Rebecca toward the thumping bass. Inside, the club was a kaleidoscope of lights and bodies. The air smelled of perfume, sweat, and overpriced cocktails. Rebecca's friends were already waving from a booth near the dance floor, their voices rising above the music like birds in a storm. "Over here!" one of them shouted. A brunette in a sequin top who looked like she'd been born under a disco ball. Kyle smiled politely as Rebecca tugged him toward the booth. He slid in beside her, nodding as names flew past him like confetti. He caught a few: Megan, Tara, and Rick. Rick, the coworker she'd mentioned in passing, was already leaning back with the easy confidence of a man who thought the world was his stage. "Drinks?" someone yelled, and menus appeared like magic. Kyle ordered water. Always water. Someone had to drive, and he wasn't about to spend the night pretending he liked cocktails that tasted like melted candy. Rebecca leaned close, her perfume soft and floral against his senses. "You sure you don't want something stronger?" Kyle smiled. "I'm good. Someone has to make sure you all get home in one piece." She laughed, brushing his arm. "You're too good to me. Don't forget it," he teased, and she grinned before turning back to her friends. The conversation flowed like champagne, resolutions, failed diets, office gossip. Kyle listened, half engaged, his phone resting on the table like a lifeline. He wasn't bored, exactly. He liked watching Rebecca light up, her laughter bright and effortless. But he felt like a spectator at a play where everyone else knew their lines. "Dance floor's calling," Megan announced, already sliding out of the booth. Rebecca turned to Kyle, eyes sparkling. "Come with me." Kyle glanced at the crowd, a sea of bodies moving like waves under strobe lights. He hated saying no, but the thought of weaving through that chaos made his stomach knot. "You go," he said gently. "I'll hold down the fort." Her smile faltered for a fraction of a second before bouncing back. "Okay. Don't let anyone steal my purse. Not on my watch." And just like that, she was gone. Silver dress flashing under the lights, laughter swallowed by bass. Kyle watched her melt into the crowd, her friends orbiting like satellites. He didn't mind. He liked seeing her happy. That was enough, for now. Rick was easy to spot. Tall, broad-shouldered with that look. The look of a man who was single by choice, fun in short bursts but allergic to commitment. Kyle had seen his type before. The kind who thrived on attention like plants on sunlight. Rebecca laughed at something Rick said, her head thrown back, hair catching the light like spun gold. Kyle's jaw tightened. He wasn't possessive. He wasn't controlling. But he wasn't blind either. He checked his phone. 10:30. The booth was a graveyard of empty glasses and abandoned jackets. He scrolled through messages, pretending not to notice the way Rebecca's hand kept finding Rick's arm. "Man, you look like you're guarding Fort Knox," a voice said. Kyle looked up. Tara, the brunette in sequins, slid into the booth with a fresh drink. "Just making sure nobody steals the purses," Kyle replied, forcing a smile. She laughed. "You're a saint. Most guys would be out there grinding like their lives depended on it." "Not my style," Kyle said. "Yeah, I can tell." Tara sipped her drink, eyes flicking toward the dance floor. "Rebecca's having fun." Kyle followed her gaze. Rebecca and Rick were laughing again, their bodies close enough to share secrets. "Looks like it," Kyle said evenly. Tara hesitated, then leaned in. Well, Rick, he's harmless, but he likes attention. Don't let it get to you." Kyle smiled faintly. "I'm not worried." But he was. By 11, the pattern was undeniable. One dance, then another, then another. Rebecca hadn't looked at him in nearly 2 hours. Not once. Kyle's thoughts churned like storm clouds. He could storm over, make a scene, demand answers, but what was the point? Drama didn't change the outcome. It only gave strangers free entertainment. So he sat, silent, watching. Rick whispered something in Rebecca's ear, and she laughed. A laugh Kyle had always thought was his. That was the breaking point. Kyle stood, straightened his jacket, and walked out. Calm, silent, invisible. The lobby was warm and quiet, a stark contrast to the chaos upstairs. Kyle's footsteps echoed as he crossed the marble floor, his thoughts a tangle of anger and clarity. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring. He didn't know if their engagement would survive. But he knew one thing. He wasn't marrying a woman who thought it was acceptable to hang herself all over another man. Outside, the winter air bit his cheeks as he headed for his car. Somewhere behind him, laughter spilled from the club like champagne. He wondered if Rebecca would even notice he was gone. Chapter 2. The slow burn. Rebecca Sims had always loved New Year's Eve. The glitter, the music, the promise of a fresh start. It was her holiday. Tonight was supposed to be perfect. Her first New Year's Eve as an engaged woman with Kyle by her side. She'd imagined the midnight kiss a dozen times. His arms around her, the crowd cheering, the world narrowing to just the two of them. Instead, she was standing in a club full of strangers, her heart pounding like the bass overhead, staring at an empty booth where Kyle should have been. 5 minutes to midnight. The DJ's voice boomed over the speakers, hyping the crowd for the countdown. Rebecca scanned the dance floor, her silver dress catching the strobe lights as panic clawed at her chest. He was gone. She checked the bathroom. Empty. She checked the bar. Nothing. She even asked a guy heading into the men's room to look. He came back seconds later, shaking his head. Nobody was in there. Rebecca's stomach dropped. She rushed back to the booth, praying he'd returned. His jacket was gone. His water glass sat abandoned, a lonely sentinel among empty cocktail glasses. The countdown started. 10, 9, 8. Her fingers fumbled for her phone. Kyle's name lit up the screen as she hit call. Straight to voicemail. 3, 2, 1. The crowd erupted in cheers. Couples kissed. Champagne sprayed like fireworks. Rebecca stood frozen, surrounded by strangers, her silver dress shimmering under lights that suddenly felt too bright. Kyle was gone. And for the first time all night, Rebecca realized something was very, very wrong. She grabbed her purse and bolted for the exit, heels clicking against the marble floor of the lobby. The winter air slapped her cheeks as she burst onto the street, scanning for Kyle's car. Nothing. Just a blur of headlights and laughter. Her phone buzzed. A text from Megan. "Where'd you go? Rick says you disappeared." Rebecca ignored it, her fingers trembling as she typed, "Kyle, where are you? Please call me." No response. She tried again, and again. Each attempt slid into the void of voicemail. By the time she reached her apartment, her mascara had smudged into smoky shadows. She kicked off her heels, pacing the living room like a caged animal. Her mind replayed the night in jagged fragments. Dancing, laughing, Rick's jokes, Kyle's quiet smile at the booth. Oh God, Kyle's face when she asked him to dance. That polite smile, the one that said I'm fine even when he wasn't. She'd left him sitting there for hours, while she laughed with Rick like they were the stars of some rom-com montage. Rebecca sank onto the couch, clutching her phone like a lifeline. She typed another message. "I'm sorry. Please talk to me." Nothing. Across town, Kyle sat in his apartment, jacket still on, staring at the dark window. His phone buzzed on the coffee table, lighting up with Rebecca's name. He didn't move. Not yet. He needed space, needed silence to untangle the knot in his chest. Rebecca didn't sleep. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, her thoughts a carousel of guilt and confusion. She loved Kyle. She knew that like she knew her own name. But tonight she'd been careless, reckless. She'd taken his quiet acceptance as permission, not the grace it was. And Rick, God, Rick, she hadn't meant anything by it. He was funny, charming, the kind of guy who made everyone feel like the center of the universe. But she should have seen how it looked, how it felt to Kyle. By sunrise, Rebecca had made up her mind. She was going to fix this, whatever it took. The first call went unanswered. So did the second. By the third, Kyle finally picked up. "Rebecca." His voice was calm. Too calm. "Kyle, Her throat tightened. "Can we talk? Please." Silence stretched like a wire between them. "I don't know what there is to talk about," he said finally. Rebecca's heart lurched. "Last night, I didn't realize, I wasn't thinking." "You weren't," Kyle said, his tone flat. "You were having fun." "That's not fair," she whispered. "I wasn't. You weren't with me," he cut in. "Not for 2 hours. Not for midnight. You didn't even notice I left." Rebecca closed her eyes, tears burning. "I'm sorry. I swear. I didn't mean." "Rebecca." His voice softened, but it didn't bend. "I'm not looking for drama. I just need time. Time." The word landed like a stone in her chest. How much time? She asked, her voice small. I don't know, Kyle said. But I know this. I'm not marrying someone I can't trust. The line went dead. Rebecca sat frozen, the silence louder than any music. For the first time in 3 years, she wondered if love was enough. Chapter 3. The fallout, the silence between Kyle and Rebecca stretched into days. Not the kind of silence that feels comfortable like two people reading in the same room. This was sharp, brittle silence. The kind that cracks under the weight of every unanswered call, every ignored text. Rebecca tried everything. Apologies, explanations, promises. Each message felt like tossing pebbles into a canyon. Kyle's responses, when they came, were short and cool. I need space. Not ready to talk. Please respect that. By the third day, Rebecca's parents knew something was wrong. She hadn't meant to tell them, but mothers have a way of sniffing out trouble like bloodhounds. One innocent question, how was the party? And Rebecca crumbled like a sandcastle in the tide. Her mother's gasp was audible through the phone. He left? Without saying a word. Rebecca winced. Mom, please, don't make it sound worse than it was. How could it be worse? Her mother demanded. You're engaged. You're supposed to be planning a wedding, not playing hide and seek with your fiancé. Rebecca closed her eyes, pressing the heel of her hand to her forehead. I know. I messed up. Her father's voice joined in, calm but firm. Sweetheart, you need to fix this before it spirals. Rebecca wanted to scream that she was trying, that she'd been trying since the moment she realized Kyle was gone. But every attempt felt like shouting into a storm. Kyle wasn't hiding. Not exactly. He still went to work, still hit the gym, still answered texts from his parents with polite brevity. But he kept Rebecca at arm's length, his thoughts locked behind a wall she couldn't scale. He wasn't angry, not in the explosive, shouting sense. Anger was easy. Anger burned hot and fast, then fizzled out. This was different. This was disappointment, heavy and cold, settling in his bones like winter frost. He trusted her. That was the part that stung. He trusted her to treat their relationship like the sacred thing it was. And she hadn't. Maybe not intentionally, but carelessness cuts just as deep as malice. By the weekend, the families had conspired. Rebecca's parents called Kyle's parents. Kyle's parents called Kyle. And before he could protest, he found himself sitting at a long dining table in his parents' house, staring at a roast chicken that smelled like betrayal. Rebecca sat across from him, her silver dress replaced by a soft sweater and jeans. Her eyes were rimmed with exhaustion, her smile brittle as porcelain. Thank you for coming, his mother said brightly, as if this were a casual Sunday dinner and not an intervention. We thought it would be good for everyone to talk. Kyle's jaw tightened. He didn't argue. Arguing was pointless. They had something they wanted to say, and he was going to let them. Without comment, without defensiveness. When they ran out of steam, he'd speak his piece. Rebecca's mother launched first. Kyle, honey, we know you're upset, and you have every right to be. But Rebecca loves you. She's devastated. Can't you see that? Kyle's father chimed in, voice measured. Relationships hit bumps, son. What matters is how you handle them. Kyle nodded slowly, his expression unreadable. Are you finished? The table fell silent. His mother blinked. Finished. Kyle leaned forward, resting his forearms on the table. His voice was calm, almost gentle, but every word landed like a hammer. I'm not angry because Rebecca danced. I'm not angry because she laughed. I'm angry because she forgot I existed. For 2 hours, I sat alone while my fiancée acted like she was single. And when midnight came, the moment we were supposed to share, she wasn't looking for me. She was looking for him. Rebecca flinched, tears pooling in her eyes. Kyle, he held up a hand. I'm not done. The room froze. I don't appreciate being ganged up on by my own family when I'm the one who was betrayed. I didn't storm out. I didn't cause a scene. I left quietly because I refused to fight for attention in my own relationship. He pushed back his chair, the scrape loud in the silence. Enjoy dinner. And with that, Kyle walked out, leaving 4 stunned parents and 1 shattered fiancé in his wake. Rebecca sat frozen, her fork untouched, her heart pounding like a drum. She wanted to chase him, to beg him to listen, but her legs felt like lead. His words echoed in her head, sharp and merciless. I refused to fight for attention in my own relationship. She'd never thought of it that way. To her, the night had been harmless fun, a blur of music and laughter. But to Kyle, it had been a slow-motion betrayal. And the worst part? He was right. She had forgotten him. Later that night, Rebecca lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment of the party. Rick's jokes, her laughter, the way her hand had rested on his arm without thinking. She told herself it was nothing, but nothing had cost her everything. Her phone buzzed, a text from Rick. Crazy night. Huh? You were the life of the party. Drinks next week? Rebecca stared at the screen, nausea curling in her gut. She typed 2 words and hit send. Not happening. Then she blocked his number. Across town, Kyle sat on his balcony, nursing a glass of water like it was whiskey. The city glittered below, oblivious to the storm in his chest. He wasn't sure what came next. He only knew this: trust was a fragile thing. And once broken, it didn't snap back like a rubber band. Chapter 4. Rebecca's Reckoning. Rebecca Sims had never hated silence until now. It wasn't peaceful, it was punishing. Every unanswered call, every ignored text was a verdict she couldn't appeal. Kyle's words from the dinner echoed like a gavel strike. I refused to fight for attention in my own relationship. She'd spent the night replaying the party in her head, dissecting every laugh, every careless touch. The truth was brutal. She had taken Kyle's quiet grace for granted. She'd mistaken his calm for indifference, when in reality, it was trust. And she had shattered it. By morning, Rebecca knew what she had to do. Step 1. Cut the rot at its root. Rick was leaning against the break room counter when Rebecca walked in, his grin as casual as if nothing had happened. He held a coffee cup like it was a prop in his personal sitcom. "Well, if it isn't the dancing queen," he said, flashing that easy smile. "Hell of a night, huh?" Rebecca's stomach tightened. She'd blocked his number last night, but seeing him in person made her pulse spike with anger and shame. "Rick," she said flatly, "we need to talk." He raised an eyebrow, amused. "Sounds serious." "It is." Rebecca crossed her arms, planting herself between him and the door. "Whatever you thought last night was, it wasn't. And it's never happening again." Rick chuckled, sipping his coffee like this was all a joke. "Relax, Beck. It was just dancing." "No," she snapped, louder than she intended. Heads turned from the hallway. Rebecca lowered her voice, but her tone stayed sharp. "It wasn't just dancing. It was disrespectful. To Kyle, to me, to everything I care about." Rick's smirk faltered. "Whoa, you're really worked up." "Damn right I am." Rebecca stepped closer, her voice trembling with fury. "Kyle is the best man I've ever known. He trusts me. He treats me like an equal. And I threw that trust in his face because I was too busy laughing at your jokes." Rick held up his hands, defensive now. "Look, I didn't mean to cause trouble." "You didn't mean to?" Rebecca's laugh was bitter. "Rick, you've done this before. I've heard the stories. You flirt, you push boundaries, and you leave wreckage behind." "Well, not this time." Rick's jaw tightened. "You think you're the first woman to tell me that?" "No," Rebecca said coldly. "But I'm going to be the last one who lets you ruin something good." She turned on her heel, leaving him standing there with his coffee and his wounded pride. For the first time since New Year's Eve, Rebecca felt a flicker of control. Small but real. Back at her desk, Rebecca stared at her phone. Kyle's name sat at the top of her messages like a ghost. She typed, deleted, typed again. Words felt useless. Apologies were paper shields against a storm. She needed more than words. She needed to show him that she understood, that she was willing to fight for what they had. Rebecca opened her calendar and canceled her weekend plans. No brunch, no shopping, no distractions. This was priority 1. That evening, Rebecca sat at her kitchen table with a notebook and pen, like she was studying for the most important exam of her life. She wrote down everything Kyle had said at dinner, every word that had cut deep. "I refuse to fight for attention in my own relationship. I'm not marrying someone I can't trust." She stared at the sentences until they blurred. Then she wrote her own list, things she needed to change, things she needed to prove. No more taking his calm for granted. No more assuming trust is permanent. No more letting other people blur boundaries. Her phone buzzed. A text from Megan. "Girl, are you okay? Heard about the dinner. Brutal." Rebecca sighed, typing back, "I'm fine. Just fixing what I broke." Megan replied with a heart emoji and a link to a meme about tequila solving problems. Rebecca didn't even smile. Across town, Kyle was at the gym, pounding out his frustration on a treadmill. Sweat dripped down his temples, his breath steady, his thoughts anything but. He wasn't angry anymore, not in the explosive sense. He was tired. Tired of wondering if he'd been blind, if the woman he loved was someone he didn't really know. His phone buzzed on the bench. A message from Rebecca. "I need 5 minutes. Not to explain. Just to listen. Please." Kyle stared at the screen, thumb hovering. He could ignore it. He could delete it. But something in the simplicity of her words made him pause. 5 minutes. No excuses. No speeches. Just listen. He typed back. "Tomorrow. 6 p.m. My place." Rebecca exhaled like she'd been holding her breath for days. Tomorrow. One chance. She wasn't going to waste it. The next day crawled like a wounded animal. Rebecca spent it rehearsing what she'd say, then scrapping every script. Words weren't enough. She needed honesty, raw and unpolished. At 5:45, she stood outside Kyle's apartment, heart hammering. She wore no makeup, no armor, just jeans and a sweater, her engagement ring still on her finger like a question mark. Kyle opened the door at exactly 6. He looked tired, his expression neutral, his posture guarded. He didn't invite her in, just stepped aside. Rebecca walked in, her pulse roaring in her ears. The apartment was spotless, as always. A glass of water sat on the coffee table, untouched. Kyle sat in the armchair, leaving the couch for her. Distance, deliberate. "You said 5 minutes, he said quietly. Rebecca nodded, clutching her notebook like a lifeline. I know, and I'm not here to make excuses. I'm here to tell you I was wrong. Kyle's eyes flicked to the notebook. You wrote it down? I needed to see it, she said, voice trembling. I needed to see how badly I messed up. She opened the notebook, reading aloud. I took your calm for granted. I assumed trust was permanent. I let someone blur boundaries that should have been ironclad. And I hurt you. Kyle's jaw tightened, but he didn't speak. Rebecca closed the notebook, meeting his gaze. I love you, Kyle. More than anything. And I'm done being careless. I blocked Rick. I told him to stay away. And I'm ready to do whatever it takes to earn back your trust. Even if it takes years. Silence stretched. Heavy. Then Kyle spoke, his voice low. Why now? Rebecca blinked. What do you mean? Why did it take losing me to make you see it? His eyes were steady, unflinching. Why wasn't I enough before? Rebecca's throat burned. You were enough. You've always been enough. I wasn't paying attention, and that's on me. But I'm paying attention now. Kyle leaned back, studying her like a puzzle he wasn't sure he wanted to solve. Trust isn't a switch, Rebecca. You can't flip it back on. I know, she whispered. But I'll wait. I'll prove it. I'll fight for us. Kyle looked away, his gaze drifting to the window where the city lights flickered like distant stars. When he spoke again, his voice was softer. 5 minutes are up. Rebecca's heart sank. She stood slowly, her legs trembling. Thank you for listening. She walked to the door, every step heavy. Her hand was on the knob when Kyle said her name. Rebecca. She turned, hope flaring like a match. I don't know if I can forgive you, he said. But I know I'm not ready to let go yet. Rebecca's breath caught. It wasn't a promise, but it was something. Chapter 5. Lines in the sand. Rebecca Sims had always believed that love could survive anything. Fights, stress, bad days. Love was the glue that held it all together. But now, staring at the ceiling at 2 in the morning, she wasn't so sure. Love wasn't glue. It was glass. Strong when whole but fragile when cracked. Kyle's words from their last meeting still echoed in her head. I don't know if I can forgive you. But I know I'm not ready to let go yet. It wasn't a promise. It was a thread. Thin, fraying, but enough to keep her from unraveling completely. By Monday morning, Rebecca knew one thing. She couldn't keep waiting for miracles. She had to act. Not with grand gestures but with something real. Something that spoke Kyle's language. Effort without theatrics. She started small. Deleted every photo from the party off her phone. Removed herself from the group chat that had been buzzing with memes and blurry dance floor pictures. It felt like cutting ties with a version of herself she didn't recognize anymore. The carefree woman who thought attention was harmless, who didn't notice the man she loved sitting alone. Then she opened her laptop and typed a letter. Not for drama, not for pity, but for clarity. Every word was a confession, a promise, a blueprint for change. I broke your trust because I wasn't paying attention. I let someone else take space that belonged to you. That will never happen again. I'm not asking for forgiveness today. I'm asking for the chance to earn it tomorrow and every day after. If you can't give me that, I'll understand. But if you can, I'll spend the rest of my life proving you were right to try. When she finished, she printed it, folded it, and slipped it into an envelope. No text, no call, just action. She drove to Kyle's apartment, slid the envelope under his door, and walked away. Kyle found it an hour later. He stared at the neat handwriting on the front. His name, nothing else, before opening it. The letter was simple, honest. No excuses, no begging. Just truth. He read it twice, then a third time. His chest ached, but not with anger. With something heavier. Something harder to name. Hope. Fragile but real. That night, Kyle sat on his balcony. The city glittering below like a spilled jewelry box. He wasn't sure what to feel. Part of him wanted to believe her. Part of him wanted to lock the door and never look back. Trust wasn't a switch. It didn't flip back on because someone said the right words. He set the letter down and stared at the skyline. For the first time in days, his thoughts drifted away from Rebecca. Not to anger, not to pain, but to himself. Who was he outside of this relationship? What had he let slide while building a life with her? The answer came in flashes. Hobbies abandoned. Friends he hadn't seen in months. Dreams shelved for later. Later had become never. Kyle stood, grabbed his keys, and drove to the bookstore. On impulse, he bought a cookbook, a journal, and a pair of running shoes. He wasn't sure why. Maybe because learning something new felt like reclaiming a piece of himself. The next morning, Rebecca woke with a plan. Not a grand gesture, Kyle hated those, but something steady. She started with boundaries. She emailed HR to request a transfer out of Rick's project team. She deleted his number from her phone, even though she'd already blocked him. She told Megan, her closest friend at work, that she was done with the late-night parties and the just one more drink culture. Megan raised an eyebrow. You're serious about this? Rebecca nodded. Dead serious. Because of Kyle? Because of me? Rebecca said quietly. Because I don't like who I was that night. Kyle's phone buzzed that afternoon. A text from Rebecca. I left something under your door yesterday. I'm not asking for a response. Just wanted you to know I meant every word. Kyle stared at the screen, thumb hovering. He could ignore it. He could send a curt thanks. Instead, he typed, "I read it." Seconds later, another message appeared. "That's all I needed to hear." Kyle set the phone down, his chest tight. He believed her, at least he believed she meant it. But meaning wasn't enough. Trust wasn't rebuilt with declarations. It was rebuilt with time, with consistency, with proof. And he wasn't sure if he had the strength to wait. That evening, Kyle tried something new. Cooking. The recipe looked simple enough. Pasta with garlic and olive oil. But by the time he finished, the kitchen looked like a crime scene. Flour on the counter, sauce on the stove, a pot that had boiled over like a volcano. He stared at the mess, then laughed. Actually laughed. Felt strange, rusty, but good. He snapped a photo of the disaster and sent it to his friend Mark with the caption, "Chef Kyle reporting for duty." Mark replied instantly, "Looks like arson, not dinner. Beer this weekend?" Kyle hesitated, then typed, "Yeah, beer sounds good." Rebecca spent her evening differently. She curled up on the couch with her notebook, writing down everything she wanted to say to Kyle. But this time, not as an apology, as a plan. Not for a wedding, not for a party, but for a life that felt balanced. A life where trust wasn't assumed, but nurtured. She didn't know if he'd ever read it. She didn't know if he'd ever want to. But she wrote anyway because action mattered more than hope. For the first time since New Year's Eve, both of them fell asleep without anger clawing at their ribs. The silence between them wasn't gone, but it had shifted. It wasn't brittle anymore. It was tentative. Waiting. Chapter 6. Kyle's new chapter. Kyle Ross had never considered himself adventurous. He wasn't the guy who booked spontaneous trips or tried exotic recipes just for the thrill of it. He liked predictability, the comfort of knowing what came next. But predictability had shattered on New Year's Eve, and now he was standing in his kitchen, staring at a cutting board like it was a battlefield. The cookbook lay open on the counter, its glossy pages promising simple weeknight meals. Kyle snorted. Simple, his ass. The recipe called for garlic, olive oil, and fresh parsley. He had garlic. He had olive oil. Parsley? Not a chance. He substituted spinach because it was green and vaguely leafy. Close enough. By the time he finished, the kitchen looked like a crime scene. Flour dusted the counter like snow. A pot had boiled over like a volcano, and the smoke alarm had screamed twice before he yanked the battery out. The pasta was edible, barely, but Kyle ate it anyway, laughing under his breath. Felt good to laugh. Strange, rusty, but good. Later, he snapped a photo of the disaster and sent it to his friend Mark with the caption, "Chef Kyle reporting for duty. Michelin star pending." Mark replied instantly, "Looks like arson, not dinner. Beer this weekend?" Kyle hesitated, then typed, "Yeah, beer sounds good." It had been months since he'd seen Mark outside of work. Months since he'd done anything that wasn't orbiting Rebecca's world. He hadn't realized how much of himself he'd shelved until now. The next day, Kyle laced up his new running shoes and hit the trail by the river. The cold air burned his lungs, his legs protested, but he kept going. Each step felt like reclaiming something: space, independence, clarity. He wasn't running from Rebecca. He was running toward himself. Halfway through, his phone buzzed in his pocket. He slowed, breath ragged, and checked the screen. A text from Rebecca. "Hope your day's going well. No pressure to respond. Just wanted you to know I'm thinking of you." Kyle stared at the message, thumb hovering. He could ignore it. He could send a curt thanks. Instead, he typed, "It's going okay. Went for a run." Seconds later, her reply appeared. "That's great. Proud of you." Kyle slipped the phone back into his pocket, his chest tight. It wasn't much, but it was something. Rebecca spent her evening differently. She curled up on the couch with her notebook, writing down everything she wanted to say to Kyle. Not as an apology, but as a plan. Not for a wedding, not for a party, but for a life that felt balanced. A life where trust wasn't assumed, but nurtured. She wrote until her hand cramped, then closed the notebook and stared at the engagement ring on her finger. It still sparkled under the lamplight, but it felt heavier now, like a question she didn't know how to answer. By Friday, Kyle had a rhythm. Work, gym, cooking experiments that ranged from surprisingly decent to call the fire department. He even bought a plant, a stubborn little fern he named Frank, because the apartment felt too quiet without something alive in it. He didn't tell Rebecca about the plant, or the cooking, or the running. Not yet. He wasn't ready to share those pieces of himself. They felt private, like seedlings he wasn't sure would survive. But he didn't shut her out completely. When she texted, he replied. Short, but warm enough to keep the thread intact. He wasn't ready to let go. He wasn't ready to forgive. He was somewhere in between, a gray space that felt both terrifying and necessary. Saturday night, Kyle met Mark for beer at a local pub. The place was loud, crowded, alive, the opposite of his apartment. Mark clapped him on the back like they'd seen each other yesterday. "Man, you've been a ghost," Mark said, sliding into the booth. "Everything okay?" Kyle hesitated, then shrugged. "Working through some stuff." Mark raised an eyebrow. "Stuff with Rebecca?" Kyle nodded, taking a sip of his beer. "Yeah." Mark didn't press. That was the thing about old friends. They knew when to dig and when to let silence do the heavy lifting. You'll figure it out, Mark said finally. You always do. Kyle smiled faintly. Hope so. Meanwhile, Rebecca was home, scrolling through photos of her and Kyle from last summer. Laughing on the beach, sharing ice cream, looking like the kind of couple who had it all figured out. Her chest ached. She wanted that back. But wanting wasn't enough. She had to earn it. She opened her notebook and wrote one sentence at the top of a fresh page. Love isn't enough. Respect is. Then she underlined it twice. When Kyle got home that night, he found another envelope under his door. No text, no knock, just quiet persistence. Inside was a single sheet of paper, handwritten. I'm not asking for yesterday back. I'm asking for tomorrow. Whatever pace you need, I'll match it. Whatever boundaries you set, I'll honor them. I don't want to be perfect. I just want to be better with you. Kyle read it twice. Then he set it on the counter, next to the fern, and stared at it for a long time. He didn't know what came next, but for the first time since New Year's Eve, he felt something that wasn't anger or hurt. He felt possibility. Chapter 7. Family Interference Redux. Kyle Ross had always known his parents meant well. They were good people, kind, supportive, the type who showed up with casseroles during flu season. But when it came to his relationship with Rebecca, their support had started to feel like a full-scale diplomatic mission. It began with a text from his mother. Dinner Sunday? Just us. Promise. Kyle stared at the screen, suspicious. His mother never promised anything unless she was hiding something. Still, he typed back, fine. 7. Sunday evening. Kyle walked into his parents' house and immediately knew he'd been ambushed. The smell of roast chicken hit him first. The sight of Rebecca sitting at the dining table hit him second. She looked up, her eyes wide, her smile brittle. Hi. Kyle's jaw tightened. Mom. His mother appeared from the kitchen, all innocence and apron strings. Surprise. We thought it would be nice for you two to reconnect. Kyle shot her a look that could have curdled milk. You promised. I promised dinner, she said sweetly. I didn't specify the guest list. Kyle exhaled slowly, counting to 5 like his therapist had taught him years ago. He wasn't going to explode. Exploding was easy. He was going to stay calm because calm was power. Rebecca stood, smoothing her sweater. Kyle, I didn't know they were going to. I believe you, he said evenly. Then he turned to his parents. Ground rules. No speeches, no guilt trips, no emotional blackmail. If anyone starts crying, I'm leaving. His father raised his hands in mock surrender. Fair enough. Kyle slid into a chair, leaving one empty between him and Rebecca. Distance, deliberate. His mother frowned but said nothing. Dinner began in tense silence, punctuated by the clink of silverware. Kyle focused on his plate, determined to ignore the elephant tap dancing in the room. But elephants are persistent. So, his mother said brightly, Rebecca tells me she's been making changes. Kyle didn't look up. Good for her. Rebecca's voice was soft. Kyle, he held up a hand. Not here. His father cleared his throat. Son, we're not trying to interfere. Kyle laughed, short and sharp. You invited my fiancé to a dinner you promised was just family. That's the definition of interference. His mother bristled. We're worried about you. Kyle set down his fork, his voice calm but cutting. Worry about me by respecting my boundaries, not by staging ambushes. The table fell silent. Rebecca stared at her plate, cheeks flushed. Kyle hated that she was caught in the crossfire, but he wasn't going to let this slide. Finally, his father spoke, his tone measured. Kyle, you've always been steady, rational, but don't let pride cost you something good. Kyle met his gaze, unflinching. This isn't about pride. It's about trust. And trust isn't a casserole you can whip up in an afternoon. His mother blinked. That's oddly specific. Kyle pushed back his chair, the scrape loud in the silence. Dinner was great. Thanks. He stood, grabbed his coat, and walked out, calm, silent, leaving 3 stunned faces and 1 broken heart behind. Rebecca didn't chase him. Not this time. She sat frozen, her chest tight, her throat burning. She wanted to scream, to cry, to beg, but she didn't. Because Kyle was right. Trust wasn't a casserole. It wasn't something you could bake and serve with a side of forgiveness. It was earned. Slowly. Painfully. Later that night, Rebecca texted him. I'm sorry about tonight. I didn't know they'd do that. I respect your space. Always. Kyle stared at the message, thumb hovering. He typed back, I believe you. 2 words, but they mattered. Across town, Kyle sat on his balcony, the cold air biting his cheeks. He wasn't angry, not at Rebecca, not even at his parents. He was tired. Tired of being the calm one, the rational one, the man who carried the weight of every expectation. He wanted simplicity. He wanted clarity. He wanted to know if love could survive this without turning into something brittle and sharp. His phone buzzed again. A photo from Rebecca. Not of her, not of flowers or sunsets. Of a notebook page, scrawled in ink. Respect isn't optional. Trust isn't assumed. Love isn't enough without both. Kyle stared at the words, his chest tight. For the first time in weeks, he felt something shift. Not forgiveness, not certainty, but possibility. Chapter 8. Rebecca's turning point. Rebecca Sims had always thought change was something that happened gradually, like seasons shifting or hair growing out. But sitting alone in her apartment, staring at the notebook on her coffee table, she realized change could also be sharp, sudden, like a blade slicing through old habits. The words she'd written last night stared back at her in bold ink. Respect isn't optional. Trust isn't assumed. Love isn't enough without both. She traced the letters with her fingertip, feeling the weight of them. They weren't just words. They were a verdict, and they demanded action. The first step was easy. Rebecca deleted every lingering photo from the New Year's Eve party. The glittering smiles, the blurry dance floor shots, they all vanished with a tap. Then she scrolled through her contacts and removed Rick's number entirely. Not just blocked, deleted, erased. The second step was harder. She opened her calendar and canceled every social event that felt like temptation. A coworker's birthday bash, a Friday happy hour, a girls' night that always spiraled into chaos. Each cancellation felt like peeling off a layer of her old self. The version that craved attention, that mistook laughter for validation. When she finished, the apartment felt quieter, cleaner, like a space she could breathe in. That evening, Rebecca called Megan, her best friend, her partner in crime, the one who dragged her onto the dance floor that night. "Hey," Megan chirped. "You alive? Haven't seen you since the great disappearing act." Rebecca swallowed hard. "I'm alive, but things are different." Megan laughed. "Different how? You finally dumped Kyle and joined the fun side." Rebecca's stomach twisted. "No, I'm fighting for Kyle." The laughter died. "Oh, I messed up, Meg," Rebecca said, her voice cracking. "I hurt him, and I'm done pretending it was harmless." Megan was quiet for a beat. Then, "You really love him, huh?" Rebecca closed her eyes. "More than anything." "Then fight," Megan said softly. "But fight smart." Rebecca spent the next hour making a list, not of apologies but of actions. Concrete, measurable steps. She wasn't going to drown Kyle in words. She was going to show him that she understood, that she was willing to rebuild from the ground up. Transfer out of Rick's project team. Cut ties with the party crowd. Schedule time with family, not for appearances but for substance. Therapy. Not because Kyle asked, but because she needed it. When she finished, she snapped a photo of the list and stared at it. Should she send it to Kyle? No, not yet. Promises were easy. Proof was harder. She'd wait until she had something real to show. Across town, Kyle was discovering something unexpected. He liked running. Not the gasping for air part, but the rhythm. The steady thud of his shoes on the trail. The cold air burning his lungs. The way his thoughts untangled with every mile. He'd started journaling too. Nothing fancy, just bullet points. Things he wanted to try. Things he wanted to feel. Tonight's entry read: cook something without setting off the smoke alarm. Call Mark about that hiking trip. Figure out what forgiveness looks like. He stared at the last line for a long time. Forgiveness wasn't a switch. It wasn't a casserole like he'd told his parents. It was a process, and he wasn't sure if he was ready to start it. Wednesday evening, Rebecca sat in her car outside the HR office. Her stomach knotted. The email had been easy. The meeting was harder. But she walked in anyway, her heels clicking against the tile like a drumbeat. "I need to transfer," she told the HR manager, her voice steady. "Effective immediately." The manager blinked. "That's sudden." Rebecca smiled faintly. So was the wake-up call. That night, she texted Kyle for the first time in 2 days. "Made a change today. Not asking for applause. Just wanted you to know I'm serious." Kyle stared at the message, thumb hovering. He typed back, "Noted." 2 syllables. But they mattered. Friday brought another envelope under Kyle's door. Inside was a single sheet of paper, handwritten. "I'm in therapy now. First session next week. Not because I'm broken. Because I want to understand why I risked something priceless for something meaningless. You don't have to respond. Just know I'm doing the work." Kyle read it twice. Then he set it on the counter, next to the fern, and stared at it for a long time. He didn't know what forgiveness looked like. But this felt like a start. Saturday morning, Kyle met Mark for coffee instead of beer. They sat by the window, sunlight spilling across the table. "So," Mark said, stirring his latte. "You and Rebecca?" Kyle hesitated. "Complicated." Mark grinned. "Aren't they all?" Kyle laughed. Really laughed. For the first time in weeks. Felt good. Strange, but good. Meanwhile, Rebecca was at her parents' house, helping her mom bake bread. No phones, no distractions, just flour and conversation. Felt grounding. Real. Like something she'd lost and was finally finding again. Her mom glanced at her, eyes soft. "You're quiet." Rebecca smiled faintly. "Just thinking. About Kyle. Always." Her mom squeezed her hand. "Then keep fighting, sweetheart. The good ones are worth it." Rebecca swallowed hard. "I know." That night, Rebecca sat on her couch, staring at the engagement ring on her finger. It still sparkled under the lamplight, but it didn't feel like a question anymore. felt like a challenge, and she was ready to rise to it. Chapter 9. Rick's Shadow. Rebecca Sims had always believed that mistakes were personal. They belonged to you, and you carried them quietly. But as she sat in the break room on Monday morning, sipping coffee that tasted like regret, she realized mistakes could cast shadows, long ones, and Rick's shadow was stretching farther than she'd imagined. It started with a whisper. Two coworkers chatting by the vending machine, voices low but sharp enough to cut through the hum of the microwave. "Did you hear about Jenna?" one said. "Yeah." "Rick strikes again." Rebecca froze, her fingers tightening around the paper cup. "Strikes again?" The words crawled under her skin like ants. She waited until they left, then walked out, her pulse pounding. By noon, the whispers had turned into fragments. Pieces of a puzzle Rebecca didn't want to solve but couldn't ignore. Last quarter, it was Sophie. Before that, Claire. HR had to step in once. Each name was a nail in the coffin of Rebecca's denial. She told herself New Year's Eve was a fluke, a careless moment, nothing more. But Rick wasn't a fluke. Rick was a pattern, and she had been part of it. That evening, Rebecca sat on her couch, staring at the engagement ring on her finger. It still sparkled under the lamplight, but it felt heavier now, like a weight she didn't deserve to carry. She thought about Kyle, his calm, his trust, the way he'd looked at her like she was the safest place in the world. And she thought about how she'd shattered that safety for a laugh and a dance. Her phone buzzed. A text from Megan. "You okay? You've been quiet." Rebecca typed back, "I'm fine. Just thinking." Megan replied instantly. "About Kyle? Or about Rick being a walking HR violation?" Rebecca stared at the screen, her stomach twisting. "Both," she typed. The next day, Rebecca requested a meeting with HR. Not to gossip, not to vent, to act. She walked into the office with her shoulders squared, her voice steady. "I need to file a report," she said. "About Rick." The HR manager blinked. "Can you tell me why?" Rebecca swallowed hard. "Because I let something slide that shouldn't have. And I'm not letting it happen again." Across town, Kyle was rediscovering something he hadn't felt in weeks. Peace. Not the brittle silence of avoidance, but real peace, the kind that came from motion. He was halfway through a 5-mile run, the river glinting under the winter sun, his breath steady, his thoughts clear. He'd been journaling every night, filling pages with questions he didn't have answers to. What does forgiveness look like? What does trust feel like when it's rebuilt? Can love survive without resentment clinging to its edges? Tonight's entry would have a new question. If someone is willing to change, am I willing to let them? When Kyle got home, he found another envelope under his door. Inside was a single sheet of paper, handwritten. "I filed a report today. Not because I want revenge. Because I want accountability, starting with myself. I can't undo what happened, but I can make sure it never happens again. You don't have to respond. Just know I'm doing the work, even when you're not looking." Kyle stared at the words, his chest tight. He didn't know what forgiveness looked like. But this felt like more than promises. Felt like proof. Later that night, Kyle texted her for the first time in days. "I got your note." Rebecca's reply came fast. "Thank you for reading it." Kyle hesitated, then typed, "You're doing the right thing." Rebecca stared at the screen, tears blurring her vision. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't a future. But it was something. And for now, something was enough. The next morning, Rebecca woke with a clarity she hadn't felt in weeks. She wasn't just fighting for Kyle anymore. She was fighting for herself, for the version of her that didn't need validation from anyone but the man who loved her. She slipped on her engagement ring, not as a symbol of certainty, but as a promise to earn it. Across town, Kyle brewed coffee in his quiet kitchen, the fern on the counter catching the morning light. He glanced at the notebook where last night's question still waited for an answer. If someone is willing to change, am I willing to let them? He didn't know yet, but for the first time since New Year's Eve, he wanted to find out. Chapter 10. Kyle's Crossroads. Kyle Ross had never thought a fern could feel like company. But there it was, Frank, perched on the kitchen counter like a silent cheerleader, while Kyle attempted his latest culinary experiment. Tonight's challenge: roasted chicken. The recipe looked simple enough, but Kyle had learned that simple was cookbook code for prepare for chaos. The oven timer beeped. Kyle opened the door and stared at the bird, which looked less like a golden masterpiece and more like something that had survived a minor explosion. He sighed, grabbed his phone, and snapped a photo. Progress report. Chicken or crime scene? Jury's out. Mark replied instantly. Looks like poultry's final cry for help. Beer tomorrow. Kyle grinned. Beer tomorrow, he typed back, then set the phone down and carved into the chicken. It was edible. Barely. But he ate it anyway, laughing under his breath. Cooking disasters had become his new normal, and strangely, he didn't hate it. After dinner, Kyle sat on the balcony, the city lights flickering like distant stars. His journal lay open on his lap, last night's question staring back at him. If someone is willing to change, am I willing to let them? He tapped the pen against the page, thinking about Rebecca's letters, her texts, the quiet persistence that had replaced the frantic apologies. She wasn't drowning him in words anymore. She was doing the work, therapy, boundaries, accountability. And that mattered. But trust wasn't a light switch. It wasn't something you flipped back on because someone said the right things. It was a bridge. And bridges took time to rebuild. Kyle wrote a new line beneath the question. Maybe forgiveness isn't about letting go of the past. Maybe it's about deciding the future matters more. He stared at the words, his chest tight. For the first time since New Year's Eve, he felt something that wasn't anger or hurt. He felt possibility. Meanwhile, Rebecca was curled up on her couch, her notebook open to a fresh page. At the top, she wrote, "What does respect look like in action?" She listed answers in neat bullet points. Listening without defensiveness. Showing up when it matters. Protecting boundaries even when it's inconvenient. When she finished, she snapped a photo and stared at it. Should she send it to Kyle? No, not yet. Promises were easy. Proof was harder. She'd wait until she had something real to show. Her phone buzzed. A text from Kyle. Just 2 words, beer tomorrow. Rebecca blinked, her heart lurching. It wasn't for her, it was probably for Mark, but it was a sign. Kyle was living, moving, healing. And maybe, just maybe, there was room for her in that future. Saturday afternoon, Kyle met Mark at the pub. The place was loud, crowded, alive, the opposite of his apartment. Mark clapped him on the back like they'd seen each other yesterday. "Man, you've been a ghost," Mark said, sliding into the booth. "Everything okay?" Kyle hesitated, then shrugged. "Working through some stuff." Mark raised an eyebrow. "Stuff with Rebecca?" Kyle nodded, taking a sip of his beer. "Yeah." Mark didn't press. That was the thing about old friends. They knew when to dig and when to let silence do the heavy lifting. "You'll figure it out," Mark said finally. "You always do." Kyle smiled faintly. "Hope so." That night, Kyle came home to find another envelope under his door. Inside was a single sheet of paper, handwritten. "I'm not asking for yesterday back. I'm asking for tomorrow. Whatever pace you need, I'll match it. Whatever boundaries you set, I'll honor them. I don't want to be perfect. I just want to be better with you." Kyle read it twice. Then he set it on the counter next to Frank and stared at it for a long time. He didn't know what came next, but for the first time in weeks, he wanted to find out. Later, he texted her. "Got your note." Rebecca's reply came fast. "Thank you for reading it." Kyle hesitated, then typed, "Tomorrow. Coffee? Neutral ground." Rebecca stared at the screen, her breath catching. She typed back, "Yes, thank you." She set the phone down, her hands trembling. It wasn't a reconciliation. It wasn't a promise. But it was a door. And she was ready to walk through it. Across town, Kyle closed his journal and looked out at the city. Tomorrow wasn't certainty, but it was a start. And for now, that was enough. Chapter 11. The olive branch. Kyle Ross had never been nervous about coffee before. It was just coffee, beans, water, heat. Simple. But as he stood outside the cafe, hands shoved in his jacket pockets, he felt like he was about to walk into a job interview where the position was his own future. He spotted Rebecca through the window, sitting at a corner table with her hands wrapped around a mug like it was a lifeline. She looked different, not in the obvious ways but in the quiet ones. No makeup, no glitter, no armor. Just Rebecca. And somehow that made Kyle's chest ache more than anything. He pushed the door open, the bell chiming overhead, and walked toward her. She looked up, her eyes wide, her smile tentative. "Hi," she said softly. "Hi," Kyle replied, sliding into the chair across from her. The air between them felt fragile, like glass. One wrong move and it would shatter. For a moment, silence stretched. Then Rebecca spoke, her voice steady but low. "Thank you for meeting me." Kyle nodded. "Thank you for asking." She swallowed hard. "I don't want to waste your time, so I'll keep this simple. I messed up. Not just at the party but before that. I stopped paying attention. I stopped protecting what mattered. And I hurt you." Kyle stared at her, his jaw tight. "You did." Rebecca's eyes glistened, but she didn't look away. "I'm not asking for forgiveness today. I'm asking for a chance to earn it." Kyle leaned back, studying her. "You've said that before." "I know," she said quickly. "And words are cheap. That's why I've been doing the work. Therapy. Boundaries. I filed a report about Rick. I transferred out of his team. I cut ties with the party crowd. Not because you asked me to, because I needed to." Kyle was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Why?" Rebecca blinked. "Why what? Why now?" His voice was calm, but sharp. "Why did it take losing me to make you see it?" Rebecca's throat burned. "Because I was blind. Because I thought trust was permanent. Because I thought love was enough. And I was wrong." Kyle tapped his fingers against the table, his gaze steady. "Do you understand what that night felt like for me?" Rebecca nodded, tears spilling now. "Like I disappeared." Kyle's voice softened, but it didn't bend. "You didn't just disappear. You made me invisible." Rebecca's chest cracked open. "I'm so sorry." Kyle exhaled slowly, the tension in his shoulders easing just a fraction. "I believe you." For a moment silence settled again. But this time it wasn't brittle. It was heavy, yes, but not hostile. Rebecca wiped her eyes, laughing weakly. God. I promised myself I wouldn't cry. Kyle's mouth twitched. You're failing spectacularly. Rebecca laughed through her tears, and Kyle felt something shift, small, but real. Humor had always been their bridge. Maybe it still was. The waitress appeared, breaking the moment. Can I get you anything? Kyle glanced at Rebecca's mug. What's that? Chamomile, she said, trying to be calm. Kyle smirked. Does it work? Not even a little. He ordered a black coffee, and when the waitress left, Rebecca leaned forward, her voice softer now. Can I ask you something? Kyle nodded warily. Depends. Do you still want this? Her fingers brushed the edge of her mug. Us. Kyle stared at her, his chest tight. He could lie. He could say no and walk away clean. But the truth was messier and heavier. I don't know, he said finally. But I know I'm not ready to let go yet. Rebecca's breath hitched. That's enough for me. Kyle shook his head. It shouldn't be. Rebecca smiled faintly. Maybe not, but it's a start. They talked for an hour about nothing and everything. About work. About Kyle's cooking disasters. Rebecca laughed so hard she nearly spilled her tea. About the fern he'd named Frank. You named a plant? Don't judge me. The conversation wasn't smooth. It had jagged edges, awkward pauses, but it was real, and that mattered. When they finally stood to leave, Rebecca hesitated. Kyle? He turned. Yeah. Thank you, she whispered, for not slamming the door. Kyle's voice was quiet. Don't make me regret it. Rebecca nodded, her heart pounding. I won't. Outside, the winter air bit their cheeks as they walked to their cars. They didn't hug. They didn't kiss. But when Kyle said, text me when you get home, Rebecca felt hope bloom like a fragile flower in her chest. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't certainty. But it was a door, and she was ready to walk through it. Chapter 12, Rebuilding Trust wasn't a sprint. It wasn't even a marathon. It was a slow walk on uneven ground, and Kyle Ross felt every jagged stone under his feet. 2 weeks had passed since the coffee meeting, the olive branch, and things were different. Not fixed, not perfect, but different. They texted now. Short, steady exchanges. No frantic apologies. No emotional ambushes. Just simple things. Hope your day's good. Made pasta tonight. Didn't burn it. Frank's still alive. Rebecca always replied with warmth but never pressure. She was learning restraint, and Kyle noticed. He noticed everything now. Saturday morning, Kyle stood in his kitchen, staring at a skillet like it was a test he hadn't studied for. Today's challenge: pancakes. He'd promised himself he'd master at least one breakfast dish before spring. The first attempt looked like a topographical map of Mars. The second was worse. He snapped a photo and sent it to Rebecca before he could overthink it. Attempt number 2. NASA called, they want their crater back. Her reply came fast. That's impressive? Want a tip? Don't flip until the bubbles pop. Kyle grinned, shaking his head. Noted, coach. The third pancake was almost perfect. Almost. He sent her a photo anyway. She replied with a string of clapping emojis and one word: progress. Kyle stared at the screen, his chest tightening. It wasn't just about pancakes. It was about everything. That afternoon, Rebecca sat in her therapist's office, sunlight spilling across the carpet. She'd been coming twice a week, peeling back layers she didn't know she had. Why had she craved attention that night? Why had she ignored the warning signs? The answers weren't pretty, but they were real. You weren't malicious, her therapist said gently. You were careless. And carelessness is often a symptom of something deeper. Rebecca swallowed hard. Like what? Like needing validation, the therapist said. Like confusing fun with worth. You're learning now that worth isn't borrowed. It's built. Rebecca nodded, tears stinging her eyes. I want to build it. For me. For him. That evening, Rebecca texted Kyle. Therapy was hard today, but good. I'm learning things I should have known years ago. Kyle stared at the message, thumb hovering. He typed back, proud of you. 2 words, but they mattered. The next weekend, Kyle agreed to meet Rebecca for lunch. Neutral ground again. A quiet diner with peeling vinyl booths and coffee that tasted like nostalgia. She was already there when he arrived, her hair pulled back, her smile tentative. Hi, she said softly. Hi, Kyle replied, sliding into the booth. The air between them felt less fragile this time. Still heavy, but not brittle. They ordered sandwiches, and for a while they talked about safe things, work, weather, Kyle's ongoing war with pancakes. Rebecca laughed so hard she nearly spilled her iced tea. You named a plant Frank? She teased. Kyle smirked. Don't judge me. Frank's thriving. Rebecca grinned. Better than your pancakes. Kyle chuckled, and for a moment, it felt like old times. Easy, warm, familiar. Then Rebecca's expression sobered. Kyle, she said quietly, can I ask you something? He nodded warily. Depends. Do you think we can get back to what we were? Kyle stared at her, his chest tight. No. Rebecca's breath hitched. Oh. Kyle leaned forward, his voice steady. We can't go back, but maybe we can build something better. Rebecca blinked, tears pooling. Better. Kyle nodded. Stronger. Smarter. With boundaries that don't break. Rebecca swallowed hard. I want that. Kyle studied her for a long moment. Then he said, show me. The pivotal moment came 2 days later. Kyle was at work when his phone buzzed. A photo from Rebecca. Not of her. Not of flowers or sunsets. Of a signed HR form confirming her transfer out of Rick's team. No more gray areas, the caption read. Kyle stared at the screen, his chest aching. It wasn't a grand gesture. It wasn't fireworks. It was quiet. Intentional. Real. He typed back, thank you. Rebecca replied, thank you for giving me the chance to prove it. Kyle set the phone down, his thoughts swirling. For the first time since New Year's Eve, he believed her. Not because she said the right words, but because she did the right things. That night, Kyle wrote in his journal, forgiveness isn't a finish line. It's a choice you make every day. Today, I chose yes. He closed the notebook, exhaled slowly, and texted Rebecca, dinner Friday? My place. I'll cook. No promises about the smoke alarm. Her reply came fast. I'll bring wine. And a fire extinguisher. Kyle laughed, really laughed, and for the first time in weeks it didn't feel strange. Chapter 13. A different midnight, New Year's Eve. 1 year later, Kyle Ross stood in his kitchen, flipping pancakes like a man who had conquered his demons, or at least learned how to keep them from burning. The apartment smelled of butter and cinnamon, and Frank the Fern sat in his usual spot, thriving like a green badge of survival. Kyle glanced at the clock. 10:30 p.m. In 90 minutes, the year would turn, and for the first time in 12 months, he wasn't dreading the countdown. He was ready. The doorbell rang. Kyle wiped his hands on a towel and opened the door. Rebecca stood there, her cheeks pink from the cold, her smile soft but steady. No glitter, no sequins, just a simple black dress and a bottle of wine cradled in her hands. Hi, she said. Hi, Kyle replied, stepping aside. Come in. The apartment looked different now, not because of new furniture or paint, but because of the space between them, the space that had been jagged and brittle last year, now smoothed by time and effort. Rebecca noticed the cookbook on the counter, the journal on the coffee table, the fern thriving in its pot. You kept Frank alive, she teased, setting the wine down. Kyle smirked. Frank's tougher than he looks. Rebecca laughed, and Kyle felt something warm unfurl in his chest. It wasn't the old ease, they'd lost that, but something better, something earned. They ate pancakes at the kitchen island, sipping wine and trading stories about the year. Rebecca talked about therapy, about how hard it had been to face herself and how good it felt to grow. Kyle talked about running, about cooking disasters, about the hiking trip he'd finally taken with Mark. You climbed a mountain? Rebecca said, eyes wide. Kyle shrugged. A hill, but it felt like Everest. She laughed and Kyle smiled. Not because the joke was good, but because her laughter didn't sting anymore. It sounded like hope. At 11:45, they moved to the balcony. The city glittered below, alive with anticipation. Fireworks waited like promises in the dark. Rebecca leaned against the railing, her breath misting in the cold. Do you remember last year? Kyle stared at the skyline. Every second. Rebecca swallowed hard. I thought about it tonight. How I almost lost you. Kyle turned to her, his voice quiet. You did lose me. For a while. Her eyes glistened. And you let me find you again. Kyle shook his head. You didn't find me. You built a bridge. Rebecca blinked, tears spilling now. Thank you for crossing it. Kyle stepped closer, his chest tight. Thank you for making it strong enough to hold. The countdown began in the distance. Muffled voices from neighboring balconies. Laughter spilling into the night. 10, 9, 8. Rebecca's heart pounded. She didn't know if Kyle would kiss her. She didn't know if she should kiss him. But when he reached for her hand, warm and steady, she knew the answer. 7, 6, 5. Kyle pulled her closer, his breath mingling with hers in the cold air. For 3, 2, 1. The city erupted in cheers, fireworks bursting like stars reborn. And Kyle kissed her. Not like last year's imagined perfection, but like something real, something earned. Something that had survived the fire and come out stronger. When they broke apart, Rebecca laughed softly, tears streaking her cheeks. Happy New Year. Kyle smiled, his forehead resting against hers. Happy New Year. He glanced at the skyline, then back at her, his voice low and certain. Life isn't perfect, he said, but it's real. Rebecca squeezed his hand, her heart steady for the first time in a year. And that's enough.